Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your time and thanks for coming out. Uh, Thank you for, this is Build Your Resiliency during the COVID-19 pandemic, and this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be sent out to you with the email address that you registered using early next week. This webinar is brought to you by Publish First and Human Resources. Publish First is a new online platform that lets authors easily publish their content and gives readers an engaging experience. You can learn more at publishfirst.com, and that's with a number 1. Human Resources is a worldwide leader in the development and provision of online assessment, student success, and personal development programs. You can learn more about Human Resources at humanresources.com. Today, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Aubrey here with us, and he's going to talk about student resilience and some of the steps you can take today to build your resilience in the face of COVID-19. Dr. Aubrey is the Director of Behavioral Health Sciences and Professor at Glendale Community College in Glendale, Arizona, where he also serves as Chair of the Behavioral Health Sciences Advisory Board and is a board member of the Exercise Science and Nutrition Advisory Council. He's also an adjunct professor at Northern Arizona State University. Dr. Aubrey has his doctorate in behavioral health and is working on a second doctorate in cognitive psychology. Dr. Aubrey also serves on the Psychology and Counseling Advisory Board for Grand Canyon University and the Advisory Board for the Arizona Trauma Institute. He also serves on the Advisory Board for the Cummings Graduate Institute for Behavioral Health Sciences, and he is the co-author of Transformative Care, a trauma-focused approach to caregiving, as well as the Resilient Learner series. Thank you very much today, Dr. Aubrey, for taking time out of your schedule to join us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. All right. So today we have a couple things on our agenda. We'll be discussing mental health, patterns of stress activation, psychological and emotional resiliency, as well as the aspects of that being self-regulation and social regulation, and giving you some resources for resiliency strength building, and then we'll have a question and answer period at the end. If you do have questions in the meantime, feel free to type them into the chat window, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Dr. Aubrey, over to you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all of you joining us. To get us started, I'd like to say Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. If you're not aware, this month is Mental Health Awareness Month. And with that, it really brings us to my question: what is mental health? And take a second to think about that. What comes to mind when I say mental health? Well, it's interesting because when I ask this question, and I even ask this question to professionals in the field, the first thing they think about is psychopathology. Like something like major depressive disorder, they'll think about, or bipolar disorder. But unfortunately, this is a very narrow perspective or view of mental health. And this is because mental health involves a lot more than just psychopathology. It also includes learning about good mental health. In other words, how do we build good mental health so that way we can decrease our likelihood of developing mental health problems? And how do we build and maintain good mental health so we can increase our success in all areas of life? And thinking, going on that last point, how do we build good mental health to increase our likelihood of success in all areas of life is really important, because the fact is that good mental health is the key cornerstone to success in anything you can think about. School requires good mental health to concentrate in class, to gain access to those cognitive skills so you can learn in class. So good mental health is important for us to be successful in school. At work, without good mental health, performance can decline. And even in relationships, it really does become an uphill battle if we don't maintain good mental health. In fact, it's interesting because years ago, I was actually seeing a couple for marital counseling, and the husband actually was a professor in the counseling department for a local university. So you would think, well, this guy really knows good communication skills, so he must have good communication skills in his marriage. And he didn't. In fact, that was the reason why his marriage was falling apart. He had the knowledge, and that's what's interesting. He had the knowledge, he taught good communication skills to his students, but he lacked good mental health to address the common challenges that he was encountering in marriage. So, in those heated moments, what was happening is that he was losing access to those higher parts of the brain that we'll discuss in a bit, that allows him to self reflect and allows him to actually apply those good communication skills that he knew. And that's why you can see that good mental health really is the key cornerstone to anything. You can have the knowledge of something, but if you don't have good mental health, it becomes very challenging to apply this, particularly when we're addressing the challenges in our life. So let's moving on to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about what happens in the brain. Or, my apology, before we get into that part, let's do a quick poll. And what I'd like you to think about in a self-reflective way is, how do you react to stress? So there's a quick poll there. Think about that. And for some of you that are high school students, think about, or even college students, if you're still living at home, think about those moments that mom will turn to you and say, did you do your homework assignment? That can be stressful for some of us. How do you react to those? Or when you have oodles of homework assignments in every single class, how do you react? So let's go ahead and take a second and just respond to one of the following on how you react to stress. Think about the last time you were stressed out and what was your reaction? And I'm not sure on my end if I'm able to see.
We're still getting some voting happening here, so I will close the poll in a quick minute here.
Sure, and I'll let you know, advise me when it's closed, because I don't think on my end I'm able to see the poll.
Okay, let's see here.
Which means it's confidential, so if I'm not able to see that, you can be honest.
No judgment. All right, I'm going to close the poll here. And so the result was 58% said they get frustrated, angry, anxious, or overwhelmed. And 11% said they're clear-headed, see the big picture, and keep learning. And 21% say they get distracted, zone out, feel numb, or frozen. And 11% said none of the above.
Good. And I think that's a very common response that I get from a lot of my students in class. So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about that, so you can have a better understanding of what's happening in the brain. So to get us started, it's interesting because when I was growing up, there was a commercial about drugs, and some of you may have seen this or may not have seen this, but in the commercial, someone would grab this egg and say, "This is your brain." And then they would crack that egg into a frying pan and then say, "This is your brain on drugs," as the eggs started to sizzle. It was very graphic. At least you can see it, if you have a good imagination. But this section really is about your brain on stress. What happens to the brain when we're stressed out? And it's important, before I get started in the patterns of stress activation, that you understand that stress is normal. It's a normal response of the body to address the challenges in our life. That's how we survive. So by no means, as I go through this, am I minimizing or saying that we should not experience stress in the body, because that's normal. In fact, stress can be a good way to succeed in life. It's through the stress activation system that we become passionate about things. If we didn't have that system, we would have a boring life. You can imagine if you're dating someone and you ask that person, what do you think about our relationship? And that person says, I don't know, guess it's okay. They have no activation, no motivation, no energy. And it's really that stress activating system that energizes them and motivates them in the relationship. So it's an important thing. However, we want to take a look what happens in the brain if our brain continues with high levels of stress activation or chronic stress. So let's take a look at what happens in the brain first when we have normal levels of stress, when we're able to deal with the stressors in life. In this stage, we're able to function, we're able to learn, and we're able to grow in life. It's during these moments that we can access the higher parts of our brain. And as you can see up here in the slide, that gives us access to abstract thinking, which we need to learn in college or in high school. For example, algebra requires abstract thinking, reflective thinking, problem solving skills, critical thinking skills. These are all the types of thinking and cognitive skills that allow us to learn and grow in school and to enjoy learning. But it's when we then, and before I get into what happens when we have chronic levels of stress, it's in addition to that, it's when we're able to manage our levels of stress and the normal levels of stress, and it's not in a chronic situation, it's maybe an acute situation, we're able to connect and attach, we're able to bond and build strong relationships. That requires that higher part of the brain axis. That's the part of the brain you recall earlier that we spoke about that the professor lost during those heated moments. He didn't have good reflective thinking. So he couldn't reflect on his behavior and change his behavior to improve his marriage. He wasn't able to access problem solving skills to improve his marriage or critical thinking skills, and definitely wasn't able to access the ability to connect with his wife. So those you can see allow us to grow, allow us to learn, and allow us to succeed in life when we have access to that part of the brain. However, when we exceed the normal levels of stress, or it goes into a chronic state, then the higher parts of the brain start to go offline. And the activity moves from the higher parts of the brain to the lower parts of our brain for survival, as you can see up here. The concern is safety. I don't feel safe right now. So now I need to focus on survival skills. And that's why we need to access that part of the brain. But as we start losing the higher parts of the brain starts to go offline and we start gaining access to the higher parts of the brain. It's in these moments it's quite interesting because there's some good research that shows that when we test students when they're in this chronic state of the lower part of the brain, their IQ starts dropping. And definitely if our IQ starts dropping, optimized learning reduces, we start to neglect responsibilities and we start to make poor decision making. It's challenging for us to become successful in school because of that, especially if this lower part of the brain is chronically activated on red line all the time. Now, once again, going back to this is a normal process. In fact, we want this lower part of the brain to be activated when we are in real danger, not when it's a perceived danger that's not real. When we are in real danger, this part of the brain will actually help us survive. So take a second and imagine that. Think about one of your instructors or teachers, and imagine that teacher instructor bringing a wild tiger into the classroom. Now that tiger is hungry because it hasn't eaten, and it's roaring around the classroom. Now at the same time, your teacher is trying to go over the elements of the periodic table. Do you think you're going to be able to learn the elements while that tiger is wandering around the room roaring? Now, if some of you are saying yes, of course I can't hear you, but if in your mind is like, yeah, I can learn at the same time a tiger is roaring around the room and is hungry and is about to devour me, let me tell you, I'm sorry to say your survival skills suck because you will not survive to make it to the or to take the final exam. But here's the honest truth is that your body doesn't work like that. The fact is, if that were the situation, if a tiger were in that room and you had just eaten a steak, what your body naturally does, it shuts down the digestive system. Blood starts moving away from the stomach and the blood moves to the thighs so it can give glucose to the thighs, to the muscles, so that you can run away from that tiger. It's a survival skill. That's the way you survive. That's why you're alive. It's the same thing in the brain. You don't need access to the higher parts of your brain, abstract thinking, reflective thinking, problem solving, critical thinking skills. All that goes out the window, starts to go offline, and it moves into the lower brain so you can survive. And that's how amazing our bodies are built to survive. The problem with this is, think about it, take a second and think about it. How many times do you bring your problems into the classroom? Because we don't have tigers, but we bring our metaphoric tigers into the classroom, all the stressors and all the problems that is occurring in our life. And as we walk into the classroom, or right now, as we log into the classroom because of COVID-19, or maybe the stressors of COVID-19, as we're thinking about what's going to happen in the future, we bring those stressors, and it's stress on the brain. And our brain starts to go offline. So just take a second and think about that, because even in our next slide, as we're talking about painful past experiences, we also bring those painful past experiences into the present moment. If every time you think about how hard it is to learn something, or I can't do this, those are your painful past experiences coming into the moment, and it's eliminating the sense of safety, and so then the higher parts of your brain go offline. So the cool thing is that what we're going to discuss today is, how do we create this sense of safety so that the higher parts of your brain starts coming back online? So what we've developed is a 6-point resiliency system to help you regain the sense of safety so that we can regain access to the higher parts of the brain. Now you can see two elements here, self-regulation and social regulation, which allows you to relax, which that relaxation is telling your body, I'm actually safe. And what it does is it brings resolution and sustained resilience. It's like putting a bulletproof vest during these times of stress, such as COVID-19. So it's important that we practice self-regulation and social regulation as we're experiencing these scary or painful experiences in life, especially too when we're in the classroom setting. So let's move into the first one, self-regulation. And as you can see up here, there are many forms of self-regulation. And I've been asked many times, what's the best form of self-regulation, or what's the best form of meditation? And my response is always the same. It's the one that you practice, because you can have the best pill in the world, but if you don't take it, what good is it? And it's the same thing with self-regulation. I can teach you the best self-regulation that has the most research, but if you don't practice it, how ineffective it could be, because you're not utilizing. So here's a list. I'm not going to go through all the lists. You can go back. I believe you'll have access to the PowerPoint, and you can go back. In fact, some of these such as self-reflective practices, I'm sure many of you listen to music. Just maybe humming a song when you're in a bad mood will bring your mood, or self-regulate your body, bring you back into a more relaxed state. So you can use any one of these skills. But I'd like to move on to the next slide and see, what are some of your preferred methods to relax your body? What are some of the skills that you use currently right now during COVID-19, or maybe in the moments that you're feeling overwhelmed because there's a lot of homework assignments? What are some skills that you use to relax your body?
And if you can just type that into the chat window, we'll see what kind of answers we get. as everybody's thinking about this, maybe we'll move on to the next question and the next slide and come back to the answers here. But if you could type that into the chat window, what you do to relax, that would be great.
And it may be just as simple taking a walk in the, around the block to cool down. So there's so many simple techniques that you can use. So think about, what is it that I use? And more importantly, do I use it in those moments that I'm stressed out? So moving on to the next slide, and we'll come back to that. What I'm going to go ahead and teach you is one particular self-regulation skill that you can use in the moment. And this is the key, is using it in real time. By all means, I have my students practice deep breathing exercises. I say, go home, practice some deep breathing exercises. What I found over the course of my life, particularly in my practice of psychotherapy in the past, what I found is that when I give an assignment to a patient to do some deep breathing exercises, and then next week we come in, we talk about how was the deep breathing exercise, you can imagine over 90% wind up not practicing the skill. And so um, over the time, myself and some of my colleagues realized that it's challenging to practice these skills in real time, because most of these deep breathing exercises are intrusive. They're not discrete. You have to interrupt what you're doing in the moment, stop for a second, and practice these skills. So for example, imagine your mom coming up to you and saying, I need you to take out the trash, or did you do your homework assignments that's due for class, or your instructor saying, we have a sudden pop quiz we're going to be giving in class today, and you're dysregulated, you're upset, you're frustrated, you're anxious, and it's awkward to tell your mom in that moment, or someone else, can you hold on one second before you continue the conversation, let me do some deep breathing exercises. And as your mom's talking, hold on, let me do some deep breathing exercises. So it's intrusive. And so what we've developed is some acute relaxation skills that you can practice at the same time you're experiencing these moments of distress. And that's the power of healing, because if you can practice these skills at the same time that you're distressed, or your triggers in life, as we call it, with time, if you continue practicing this, you start healing from those wounds, from that distress. Eventually, do you start to desensitize from that? So as a quick example, before I start showing you what one of the many techniques we use for acute relaxation, and we teach students, I had one student who was taking one of my classes. It was a college success class, and she was struggling. She had already failed her math class, and she was anxious because if you fail too many times in a community college in your math, eventually you're not able to retake it again. So that was stressful for her. And she had mentioned the problem that she was encountering is that every time she sat in front of a quiz, because they would have these quizzes every week, or she had her midterm or final, her mind would go blank. She would freeze. And she was just filled with anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. And so you could imagine if she kept on doing that with all her quizzes, of course, she wasn't going to pass the class. So what I asked her to do is practice an acute relaxation skill that I'm going to teach you in a bit, and just do that every time you go into class. Because I said, I guarantee you, when you go into your math class, if you notice if your muscles are tense, they're tensing up. And when your muscles tense up, it's an indication that your body is stressing out, your mind is stressing out, and your body's preparing to fight or flee. And it's losing access to the neocortical parts of the brain, that higher parts of the brain that we talked about earlier. So you can't learn in class, and that's why you're struggling. So I asked her to practice this over and over again as you were in class, and it was interesting because come midterm, she came to me and she said, for the first time, I was able to take my midterm, and I wasn't stressed out. The answers came to me all of a sudden. So let's go to the next slide.
Actually, can I quickly report, we do have some questions, the answer to what people do to relax. We've got several
Okay.
different answers. I curl up in my bed with anxiety. There was a number of people who listed music. Exercise was an answer, sleeping, bath, massages, going swimming, having naps, going for a walk, and doing yoga were all given as answers.
Perfect. And I want to encourage that you keep on practicing those skills, but now we're going to move on teaching you practicing those skills in the moment as you're experiencing it. Of course, if you're in the middle of the exam, it would be very awkward, and by all means continue practicing yoga, but it would be awkward if you start doing some yoga poses in the middle of class. So that's what I mean about this non-intrusive and discrete techniques. They're not deep relaxation, and they're not going to induce a deep state of relaxation, but they're going to be enough to trigger the mechanisms in the body that relax you and give you a state of safety. And if you pair that with those triggers that you're having in life, so every time your mom says, "Did you do your homework assignment?" that triggers your body and activates your body and start losing access to the higher parts of your brain. If you practice these skills every single time you hear that, eventually you start to desensitize, and eventually you start saying, "Well, you know what? My mom just cares about me. She worries about me. She doesn't have to," because you're now gaining access to the higher parts of your brain, and now you're able to self-reflect the parts of your brain that you lost when your brain's stressed out. So let's move to the first skill that I'm going to go ahead and teach in reference to acute relaxation skills. So this skill is a simple skill. We actually call it a body scan, and my colleague Dr. Gentry calls it the wet noodle. So that might be easy to remember. Hey, I'm going to practice the wet noodle. And all you do in this is you just scan your body. You can start from head to toe or from toe to head, whichever is your preference. And what you do is just scan to see if there's any tensed muscles in your body. And I tell folks, notice that, because we tend to get tense between the eyebrows. Notice that the eyebrow section. Are you squeezing those muscles? How about other facial muscles? And what you're going to do is just loosen them. Just relax them. You're the one that's squeezing those muscles. You can also loosen them. And sometimes it may take some practice, but you can accomplish that because you do have control of your muscles. And then you continue down as you notice your neck. Is there any constricting of the muscles in the neck, in the shoulders? If there is, just loosen them. Drop the shoulders. And you continue down to the chest, the abdomen, and the hip area. Very important, that hip area, because the hip area is one area that if you were able to relax that, if you're able to master relaxing the area of the hip, it's one area that gives you a systemic relaxation in the body. It's the only place that if you relax that area, if you relax the front part of the hip, the back part of the hip, you'll notice that other parts in your bodies also start this warm sensation of relaxation. You can't do that with your shoulders. So I tell students, focus specifically on relaxing that area. The thighs, the shins, the feet. And you can do this, and of course I took longer than 5 seconds, but you can do this fairly quickly with your eyes open. As someone's talking to you, you can do a body scan. In fact, right now, as I'm giving this presentation, I'm doing a body scan. I don't have to stop presenting and say, hold on, audience, I need to do some deep breathing exercise. I can practice a simple skill that what it does is it gives this message to my nervous system that you're safe. If the muscles in my body are not tensed up, that means I'm not in danger, so you're safe. So now you can regain access to the higher parts of my brain to present or to do whatever I want, to learn, to grow, to heal. Moving on to the next slide. So we just talked about one technique of self-regulation, which is your ability to self-regulate the body, and what I mean by self-regulate, to induce a state of relaxation that causes this message to say that I'm safe in the moment. Because I'm feeling safe in this moment, I don't have to access the lower parts of my brain for survival. Instead, I can access the higher parts of my brain for learning, for growth, and for healing. But we can also do this through what is known as social regulation. And this is really the ability to use relationships, interpersonal connection and supports, your friends, your colleagues at work, your family, your instructors, using them to help regulate the body and create a sense of safety. Our body is meant to do this. Our body is meant to connect with individuals in times of stress to 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 create this state of sanctuary, a safe place, and allow us to then relax. And then we're in this state of relaxation, the state of safety, then we can grow and learn. So during this time, it's very challenging because there's limitations with COVID-19 occurring on these social relationships. We can't go out and then, as we did in the past, or we shouldn't at the very least, to protect ourselves. But it's important that our body does connect with individuals so that we learn to heal from the stress that we've accumulated throughout the day. It's important, for example, I tell in couples counseling, but even if you're not married and even in relationships you are, to have those relationships where at the end of a stressful day, you have somebody to talk about how, how stressful the day was. That's how your body heals from that. If your body doesn't heal from that, it creates this buildup that later impacts your learning. And I'm not going to go into great depth about the mechanics of that, but that's what happens in the body. It prevents you from learning, it prevents you from growing, it prevents you from succeeding, especially in relationships. So it's important that we use this social regulation throughout our entire life, every time, especially in moments of stress. So I'm going to encourage you to find ways to create community of support. Build communication with fellow students in class. It may be creating that community of a study group. Hey, can we all get together and we all can study for this exam? It's a lot less stressful studying as a study group for an exam than it is doing it on your own. But of course, and some of you might say, well, it's more stressful sometimes with particular individuals, and that's why we need to create a social support network that creates sanctuary, that creates a safe place. You want to select individuals that support you, that listen to you, that understand you, and that may involve you training your support system. So, given the situation that we're currently in, we're going to have to be creative on ways to build interpersonal connection and support. And some of you are very good at this. We're doing video chatting right now, although it's a one-way conversation, but there's video chatting that you can do in a two-way, and you can have communication with your friends, and you can let them know how stressful it was and today with today's exam, and that's a way of releasing that energy so that it's not accumulating in the body and not harming your body and your mind. Phone calls, giving some of yours, and that might not be the method that's currently used by many, but giving folks, your friends a call. It's important that you hear their voice because our brains, our nervous system are built to relax hearing the voice of humans, not just texting. I know you guys are good at texting, but our brains are not built. We're still connecting, and I encourage you to continue texting in its appropriate moments, right? Not in class, but connect with others, hearing their voice, because it actually builds a deeper bond, a deeper connection by hearing the human voice. And like I said, our nervous system is built to relax by hearing people's voices. So I encourage you to do that. There's many other ways. I know there's social media. Find ways to connect with others because it's important for your mental health that you do this. So let's move on to the next slide, and I want to hear from some of you on what is the best ways, or what are some ways that you build your social support system. Who's part of your social support system? Is it family, friends, coworkers, groups online or in person? There are many chat rooms online. and community groups online that support. How about a counselor, healthcare professional? We don't have it up here, but how about your teacher? How about an advisor? So go ahead and take a second and inform us on who forms part of your social support network.
Just giving people another minute here. And then I'll
Now,
close
as you're answering this, um, one of the challenges that I've come across with supporting students in building their social support network, and this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Sometimes we bring not just our current stress, but our past stress into the into the um, into the classroom setting. So one of the challenges that I've found with students is sometimes they're struggling with math, and I'll ask them, "Have you tried going to a tutor?" Now that's an interesting thing because that's very common, especially in college. Many college success instructors will show them where the tutoring centers are to students. And in my experience talking to these college success instructors, I've asked them, how many of your students actually go to the tutor? And some of them actually have done a poll and asked their students, have you actually gone to the tutor? And it's very rare that students actually even giving them advice. If you go to a tutor for math, that might be helpful. It's very rare that they go to the tutor. And so that really brings a question up: is why aren't students seeking out their connection with these resources that can help them become successful? And at
we
least,
ha
oh, go ahead.
sorry. I was just gonna give you the results of the poll. It looks like 89% of people say their family is in their social support network, 78% say my friends, 44% my coworkers, 17% groups online or in person, and 11% counselor or healthcare professional.
Good, good. Thank you for that. And so going back to what I was saying earlier, to make a long story short, it's interesting because when we talk to students about do they trust relationship, particularly with adults, it's sometimes hard for students to trust adult relationships. They tend to trust their peers, those friends of their age group, but it's a challenge for them to trust, maybe a tutor or an instructor. And that's because of their past learned experiences with relationships. They've had many experiences where maybe adults have made promises. So there's broken promises because they didn't follow through with that. And then as instructors or professors, we go and say, why don't you go see a tutor? But deep down inside, we don't feel safe. We don't believe that's going to help. And so we avoid going to a tutor because we don't believe, I've tried that, it doesn't help. And so when we talk about building a support system in the academic resiliency program, we train students on how to heal from those past experiences that come into the present. And like I said, it starts eliminating the higher parts of the brain that we start bonding and connecting, even with adults that can support us in being successful in school. So I just wanted to point that out as we were doing the survey. So moving on to the next slide. I'm not going to go into depth about this, but I mentioned earlier that we have a 6-point resiliency system, and I was only mentioning 2. But here's one other: the self-care and revitalization. And think of this as driving a car. If some of you drive a car, of course, if you don't put gas in the car, eventually your car will stop and it will no longer turn on because it needs gas to continue. Well, our bodies are the same and our minds are the same. We need to refuel because as we're encountering stressful events in our life, we're using internal resources. Those are the resources that I spoke about earlier, the areas of the brain, and then our body also has these internal resources to deal with these events that are occurring in our life. But as we start using those internal resources and even external resources, but more those internal resources, they start to become depleted, and we need to refuel, because otherwise what can happen, and what happens to many students if they don't refuel, they wind up halfway through their degree burnt out, and they're so exhausted they can't continue anymore in school. And so they reach a point where they're thinking about, I just can't do this anymore. I've had students in the nursing program come to me, and they're 2 or 3 classes shy of graduating, and they're coming in saying, I'm quitting. I'm not coming back next semester. They're burnt out. And so that's why it's so essential that you start learning how to practice self-care and revitalization, so you can start refueling, so you don't reach a point where you're burnt out and you can achieve your goals in life. And how do we do this? Well, in the academic resiliency program, we teach you 4 areas to refuel. That's eating healthy. And that might not be something that you want to learn, but it is eating healthy. It's healthy exercise, healthy activity, healthy sleep, very important, and healthcare and self-compassion. So let's move on to the next slide. Like I said, I can't really touch on all the details, but these are the 6-point resiliency system that we offer students to help them become successful, not just in school, but help them become successful on all areas of their life. The goal is, at least academic wise, the goal is for us to improve mental health in students, for us to enhance the joy of learning, because without learning building good mental health and learning these resiliency skills, it's a challenge to enjoy learning in school. But we can enhance learning if we build these skills, and more importantly, increase academic performance. And each of us want to do that, and I'm assuming that's why you're on this webinar. How can I learn skills to improve academic performance? So these are the 6 skills. I won't go into depth, but we did talk about self-regulation, but there's also mental flexibility. There's also channeling and ability to channel motivation and become a self-directed learner, which is essential to becoming successful in school. There's also developing the positive psychological strengths so we can enjoy not just life, but also enjoy learning. Social regulation, which we discussed today, and then we briefly discussed self-care and revitalization. And so you can take a look at, moving on to the next slide, I'll mention you can go to this website. Well, I thought it actually will be the next one. I thought we had switched. So let's go to the next one and then we'll come back to this one. So you can go to this site here if you want to learn more about how to build those 6 elements or 6-point resiliency system. The fact is that this resiliency system is the same resiliency system that I train police officers and firefighters how to deal with the traumatic stress in their life and how to be successful in their career. The same skills that I use to train students to become successful in school. So it's a powerful tool. So, but going back to the previous slide, here's some additional resources, particularly during this moments of COVID-19. You can go ahead and click on this because I believe you'll have access to the PowerPoint. But one additional skill that I want you to practice is the body scan, and I want you to add that to this resource list. Every time you're watching the news media, your body, just notice what's going to happen in your body if you're watching about COVID-19. Your body's going to tense up. If you're thinking about what's going to happen in the future, what's going to happen to my job, if you notice, if you're self-aware, your body, your muscles start to tense up. So I want you to practice every time you're watching. I'm not saying, I mean, I do practice news fast where I don't watch any media for some time because it starts to create this toxicity in my body. So I need to fast from that. But I'm not saying completely eliminate yourself from the knowledge of what's occurring right now around the world. But if you are learning about this, make sure you're doing this in a relaxed body. Make sure you're self regulating, because if you're not, what's happening is that your body starts to internalize that negative messages, internalize all that toxicity, and it starts impacting your ability to become successful in school and in other areas of your life. You get stressed out and you lose access to those higher parts of your brain. So I encourage you, the next time you watch the news, do a body scan. And then the next time you watch the news again, do a body scan. And the next time again, do another body scan. Relax, loosen those muscles. And you'll start noticing after a while, if you practice this skill, that the news media doesn't upset you as much as it did in the past. That's the building of resiliency. So with that said, that gives us some time, couple of, I believe about 13 minutes to open up. Here's once again the website you can click to learn more about additional resiliency skills that you can practice. But there's also, you can email any questions directly to Publish First and they can answer. If they need to, they can reach out to me. But moving on to the next slide, I want to go ahead and open up to some questions and answers.
I do understand if anybody's having problems with the chat panel, it may not work if you're in the full screen mode. You may need to reduce your screen size if you're on a computer, on a desktop, in order to see the chat panel. But if you can enter any questions you have into the chat panel, we will try and address them. And thank you very much for those who may be out of their scheduled time. Appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for attending. So let's give it a couple minutes here for any potential questions.
Sure, and as you're writing questions, think about some of those other domains. You might have questions, or think about, you may have a particular question that you want to be specific. I have a current situation that's one of my huge triggers. How can I practice one of these resiliency skills to help me heal from that trigger that really gets my blood boiling? Like I said, these are powerful tools that when I go on, I train some of the most stressful occupations, individuals, and they see a huge difference. We have this class at Glendale Community College, a resiliency class, and we do assessments, and we assess depression, anxiety, and individuals that practice this. We see decreased levels of anxiety, decreased levels of depression, across the board. And there's many. We also measure mindfulness because there's a lot of mindfulness practice that we do in the self-regulation component. So feel free to ask any questions. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have about 11 or 10 minutes for questions.
I believe the time promised was 45 minutes, but I do have a question here of, do you anticipate students could have difficulty readjusting to everyday life once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted?
Absolutely, because what we have to understand is that one of the dysregulation that's occurring with COVID-19 is we don't have this regular routine anymore. And by the way, our body enjoys routine. So by any way, that's a good way of self-regulating, is try to find a good routine, whether that's exercise, and continue that. You don't have to go to the gym. In fact, I just recently purchased a bicycle, and there's a bike trail behind my home, and I take that bike trail. So, but once COVID eventually, whether they find a vaccine or whatever the case goes, and we go back to our regular routines, every one of us are going to struggle, including myself. I'm working from home right now, and I'm thinking too, come when I go back, because I'm off in the summers, when I go back in August, it's going to be a challenge for me to go back to work and then have to be in my office. Uh, so I think for students, it's going to be the same thing. They're going to be adjusting to the world of COVID-19 right now, and then the world's going to flip upside down again, and it's going to change, and that's going to dysregulate the body. So, but these are the important times that we need to learn to regulate our body, because part of academic resiliency is really teaching students too, as well, is what is real danger. The fact that I have to take my class online instead of in person, yeah, I enjoyed seeing my friends, but is my life really in danger? The fact I'm doing that. So it's really giving them those critical thinking skills, the ability to realize that I'm overreacting. I mean, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. And it really, if we can have that mental perception, that change in perceiving things, our body starts to regulate and we start to access parts of the higher brain function, those cognitive skills that we talked about, and we can meet the challenges of life. Hopefully that
We have
answered your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aubrey. We have one more question that I see, and that was what should be the first thing to do when a person feels the burnout's really close, but they still have tasks and duties left that they need to complete?
So those are the moments, and I come across this many times with police officers, and it's interesting with police officers, they're counting the days till retirement. Um, and it's not, it's interesting because many of the police officers, you've only been working a couple of years and you're already counting your days of retirement. And it's just burnout. It's because the body's just not made to be exposed to such high levels of traumatic stress or stressors in life on an ongoing basis. The body needs to take a break and revitalize itself. In such a case, if you're feeling a point that you're about to burn out, it really is a sign of your body telling you, I need to take a break. I need to refuel myself. I need to revitalize. And that may mean at times, it may mean that you need to take a break from maybe not taking a class for college students. Maybe next semester, take a break, take care of yourself, take care of your health, come back revitalized the following semester. Because if you push yourself way through this using brute force, you're going to burn yourself out more, and eventually you're going to burn out and quit completely forever. And you don't want to do that. So it's better to take a small break, maybe reduce the amount of credit hours you're taking the following semester if you don't want to completely not take, but maybe instead of taking 12 credits, maybe this semester I'll take 6, and then find more time to take care of my mental health and my physical health so I can feel more revitalized for the following semester to take more classes.
Thank you. I believe we have, I think I see some hands raised, and I don't know if they're connected and able to speak to us. I can try unmuting and see if they wanted to ask the question. I'll follow up with you if you've raised your hand. I appreciate everybody's time, and certainly Dr. Aubrey. It was a very informative session. And thank you very much, and have a great day. Keep an eye out for that email next week. It will have a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a recording that you can refer back to. Thanks again very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me.